All right, our market analysis today with Bongani Mabuza, Head of Treasury, Nedbank Eswatini. We start with our foreign exchange. We want to understand what these numbers are telling us. Clearly, the rand is under pressure against all three major indices. One wants to understand, because the dollar, the euro, and the pound, all of them, is this a reflection of what one could call a global risk aversion, or it's something else?
No, thanks, Mguni. Good afternoon to you and good afternoon to your viewers. It's a pleasure to be back here to talk about what's moving markets today. There's quite a bit happening globally in markets, and I think there's a common theme. There's usually a common theme around market prices, and the theme is still the U.S. trade policy. That tends to be what's moving markets. So I'll start by talking about the FX markets. We are seeing the rand, as you are saying, losing ground against most major currencies. It's actually the other currencies gaining strength, with the rand sitting at 17.79 against the dollar, at 24 against the pound, and at 20 against the euro. It's down by between about 0.5% to about 0.75%, depending on which currency you're looking at. And the real story there is that there's a risk-on sentiment in the West because of the U.S.-China trade talks. Okay. So what that means is that is obviously dollar positive, and what happens to the dollar tends to ripple into the other major currencies. It's
quite interesting because, one would have assumed that with all the turmoil that is happening in the U.S. with Trump's administration, what is happening in Los Angeles right now, everything would be going downstream. But I suppose these conversations around, the trade talks around China and the U.S. has a much bigger impact.
100%. So markets are very keen on fundamentals, or right. What actually moves the Dow. What actually moves the Dow is trade.
100%. Yeah. We're going to go straight to our commodities, but perhaps before that, are you saying that outside of what is happening with the dollar, it's the same story with the pound and the euro?
100%. So the euro story, I'll just talk about, and the euro is linked to the pound in most cases. What is happening in Europe is that there is a positive sentiment in Europe, because there's an expectation of economic growth, which is largely driven by increased fiscal expenditures by most of the European countries. And most of these will go into defense spending as they show up their defenses. Each of those countries is driven mostly by Germany, but most of the European countries. And I think that narrative is what's driving the strengthening of the euro.
I see they already have our commodities on the screen. Perhaps let's drill into this conversation here. Gold obviously inching upward again. It's almost always usually the story there, but now well above, what is that, 3,330.20 per ounce. Are we watching a quiet flight to safety here? What is happening?
Thanks, Mguni. So the flight to safety continues, and I'd just like to take you back a bit. If you remember, not so long ago in February, we were talking about how gold prices were high, and at the time they were 2,800, and they were reaching all-time highs. And
look at this number.
That story still continues. So the gold price advanced even after the U.S. and China said that they had agreed on a plan to ease trade tensions during their talks in London. So that there's still a flight to safety, as you can see. From an oil perspective, oil price steadied as traders digested headlines on the U.S. trade policy, including an appeal court ruling that the U.S. president can press on in his global tariffs. So that's basically what tends to be moving markets. But we can see that the oil price is slightly down today, and that is positive. I think just bringing into closer to home, if the oil price trends down, as we have seen the dollar emalangeni price trend down, regardless of today, but in the previous in the past few weeks, it's been stronger. The local currency has been stronger, so that possibly has positive effects for the consumer.
I mean, the trip to the pump has been quite favorable this past couple of days, and I've been seeing the queues in all these gas stations, and I imagined why that was. Let's move on to our equities. We have the S&P 500, of course, and what we're seeing here is that there's a rally that is continuing. It's punching through, what is this, 6,000, the 6,000 barrier.
Yep.
There we are, 6,038.81. Is this optimism rooted in real economic fundamentals, or are we in a liquidity-driven sort of euphoria?
No, thanks. And maybe I'll take a bottom-up approach. Starting with the JSE All Share Index. Okay. We saw that down just about 2/3%, and that's really driven by what we were talking about earlier, a flight back to the west, if you'd call it that. And the JSE was really a victim of that. Yeah. From a FTSE perspective, it's basically unchanged. The big change was in the US, where we saw a 0.6% increase in US stocks, and this was led by big tech names as they led gains, with Tesla being up 5.7%. After it set a date for June for the official launch of its robotaxi. And there's a big focus on the inflation number in the US. That was what was driving market. And I think the inflation number, which was coming out today, is really indicative of whether the US Federal Reserve is going to continue to cut interest rates, especially in its September meeting or not. That number was expected this afternoon, and it just came out. And we saw US inflation increase by 0.1%, which was a below market increase. The market was expecting an increase of about 0.2%. So I think this then bodes well for those who are expecting further interest rate cuts. And the lower interest rates are, we know that tends to bode well for equities markets in particular.
Let's do a sort of, outro of everything. Let's look at everything that we have seen today. We are seeing currencies obviously wobbling. We are seeing commodities sending mixed signals. You have your equities here. They are dancing to different tunes, if you like. What is the overarching narrative here? It's always the story from the West. Why are they so powerful?
Yeah, how much time do we have?
We have a minute and a half.
But really, I think it's because the US alone is such a force economically in the world. I mean, you have this one market which accounts for about 25% of global GDP. So obviously, anything that happens in the US tends to be consequential for the rest of the world, and it's a market that we watch closely, especially because with commanding 25% of global GDP means that it has a lot of strength from a demand perspective. So whatever happens in that market tends to affect the demand for goods or production in our markets, and so on. And I think from a tech perspective, they've been leading the charge from a supply perspective. So it's a big part of the global economy. So it's one to watch. Yeah.
Thank you, Bongani. That tech conversation is going to be an interesting one with everything that's happening in Asia. He's the head of treasury from Nedbank Eswatini. Let's go for a net break. We'll wrap up the show shortly with Lungalele.
Digital helps you make cross-border payments. Human gives you global specialists. Digital allows you to apply for a loan anytime, anywhere. Human connects you to credit experts. Digital puts you in control of your money, while Human connects you to wealth advisors. Digital allows you to freeze, unfreeze, cancel, and reorder your card. Human gives you that personal touch. Digital when you want it. Human when you need it. Get the complete private banking experience with Nedbank